Hello and welcome to this second half of my two-part video on different types of chords. If you haven't seen part one, I would recommend watching it. There is a link in the description below. The topics covered in this video aren't directly related to what we were talking about in that video. However, the things in this video will be slightly more advanced, slightly more complicated, so if you want to ease yourself into the language that I'll be using, I'd recommend watching part one. In this video we're going to be looking at symmetrical structures, but first we're going to talk about some suspensions. Now normally suspended chords are written as sus chords, sus being short for suspended, and there are several different methods of approaching suspended chords. There are two different styles, broadly speaking, of talking about suspended chords. You've got classical style and you've got contemporary style. I'm going to talk about classical style first, which will then flow naturally into contemporary style, because contemporary style plays off and plays around with the ideas that were present in the classical era. In classical suspensions there are three stages. In the middle you get the suspension itself, which is a triad with the third raised to the next degree of the scale. This altered note is dissonant and therefore must be prepared and resolved. The preparation sees the dissonant note be consonant within the chord that precedes the suspension. In other words, before a C sus chord, where the suspension is the F note, the F must appear as part of a normal triad immediately before the C sus chord. An example of this could be an F chord. After the suspension, the suspended note resolves back down to the third of the chord to make a consonant triad. In our example, the F resolves downwards, always downwards, by step to the E to make a normal C major chord. Think of it as a chord change from F to C, but the note F itself is late in changing by one whole chord, creating a moment of brief dissonance while it catches up. However, in contemporary music, there is less of a requirement to prepare and resolve these dissonant suspensions. It's more acceptable in contemporary music to just play suspended chords in a series of completely unrelated chords, just because it sounds nice. This has led to the invention of something called the Sus2 chord. Classical suspension chords are normally known as sus4 chords, and that's because when we're doing a suspension, as I said, you take the fourth note from in the scale, so in this case F, and it goes down by step to the third, so 4, 3, F, E. However, in sus2 chords, the suspension resolves upwards rather than downwards, so you take the second note of a scale, such as D, and then it goes up to the third, so D to E. So you get something like. It's more acceptable to have suspensions that go upwards rather than downwards. This did not happen in classical style for the vast majority of cases. However, in contemporary music, absolutely fine. There's often some debate about whether sus2 chords are even real things. Classicists will look at sus2 chords and argue that they don't really exist at all, because sus2 chords are an inversion of sus4 chords, and so technically sus2 chords don't really count. That's the classicists' argument anyway. However, a contemporary musician will understand the benefits of the two different types of sus chords more, which gives them greater flexibility. So, two sides to every coin. Inversions of chords mean that when you flip the order of the notes within a chord upside down or inside out, you can end up with a different chord name despite playing the same notes. What this means is if you take a C sus2, for example, and you rearrange the notes in a new order, you can end up with a G sus4. Same notes, but a different chord, because you've got a different note at the bottom. Any sus2 chord is an inversion of a sus4 chord, 5 notes upwards or 4 notes downwards away. So C to G upwards is 5 steps, but C down to G is only 4 steps. Don't forget that in orchestras with dozens of players, it's easier for composers to pay more attention to inversions of chords. When you've got a whole string section with each player just focusing on one single note, it's up to the composer to sort out the inversions and what sort of chords he wants to employ. However, when you've got one person trying to play 4 notes at once, sometimes one's fingers just aren't flexible enough to pay much attention to inversions. This is why there's been a lot of relaxations of the rules of suspensions and things, just because our hands just don't have enough flexibility. And so these nice new chords sort of come out of that, and that's another differentiation between classical music and contemporary music. These chords contain 2 minor intervals, in that both gaps that separate the notes are minor thirds. These occur and can often be turned into diminished 7th chords, where you add a 4th note that is also another minor third away. There are only 3 diminished 7th chords. There can only be 4 notes in a diminished chord, because if you try to add a 5th note that was another minor third apart, you would end up with the root note again in the higher octave. This is called a symmetrical structure, whereby a limit is put on how many notes you can have in a chord before you start repeating yourself. You can start at a C sharp diminished 7. It's the lowest C sharp diminished 7 chord you can play. So we got these 4 notes, then you move it up a position. There's no similarity of the notes yet, nor is there any similarity with the next position. However, we move it up again to E diminished 7, and we actually have the same notes, they're just in a different order. I then move it up again, and we get the same 4 notes that were in the D diminished 7 that we played all the way down here. And then we go up one more, and we get the same notes as the D sharp diminished 7. Move it up again, and we're back to the same notes that we started with, all the way down there with the C sharp diminished 7th. The same sort of idea applies with augmented chords as well, where all the intervals are major thirds. There are 4 augmented chords, for the same reason that there are 3 diminished 7ths. Augmented 7ths can exist as well, but they break this pattern of being symmetrical. There are more types of chords to be explored, such as polychords or spectralist chords. However, I feel like I've covered a wide variety of chords that a ukulele player would traditionally encounter. If people want to learn about different types of chords that go beyond the types that I've talked about in these 2 videos, then I'm more than happy to make a video. Just please leave a comment below. My next video on chords will be about thinking about chords in a broader context. In these 2 videos I've looked at chords in a sort of isolated scenario, or in a very small section of music. But I'm going to explore how chords can be thought about and arranged in a broader context of a whole song or piece of music. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below, and to make sure you don't miss out on the next episode, please do hit that subscribe button. It really does help me out. Furthermore, if you've enjoyed what you've seen and would like to get these videos early, as well as get some more exclusive bonus content, then head on over and pledge to my Patreon. I'm doing Patreon now, where you can pledge just a few pounds a month and get all sorts of perks. The link is in the description where you can find out more about that. If you'd like to leave a tip, my PayPal is also in the description, as well as links to my Facebook and Instagram, should you be so kind enough as to follow those accounts. Finally, you can check my website where you can find more gig dates where I'll be performing, and I also put various public workshops that I'm going to be doing on that page as well. So please head over to the website that's appearing on screen now, and again there's a link in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.